in our history as those who have, for whatever reason, became more popular or more well-known. But we know that hers is only one of many similar stories that happened throughout the early first couple of centuries as Christianism was being established, especially across the Middle East. So now we jump ahead a bit. So we're now up to the Middle Ages. And the Middle Ages is a time of great, interesting enough, great changes, but also of dark periods, where folks are entrenching, they are become harsher, they become less tolerant of one another, they're pushing their ideas. Power is being consolidated through the creation of greater wealth and holdings and lands. So we're going to see now that some key characters come about and help maintain the moral identity of our civilizations in that period. We begin with a lady called Hildegard von Bingen. She is one, for example, that I have not heard before doing this study. And she was born in Germany. She came from a wealthy family as well. And what was unique about her, that starting at age 8, she started having visions. And these visions would change her entire life. She would describe how she could see these things. Even with her eyes open, she knew it wasn't coming from her eyes. She would describe how the visions were inside her soul, her internal eyes. So she starts describing what we kind of understand today as the perispirit, where we are represented both with internal and external capabilities. And she could at that time recognize that what she was hearing and viewing was not coming from her ears, from her eyes, not the external ones. She describes this in a book called Scivias. She had 26 visions that she described in a very detailed manner. Very incredible. And she makes a prediction. This is interesting because now we know what's happening with our world. Back in the 2nd century, she said that one day we'll see a regenerated world where angels will return with confidence to stay among men. So if we understand angels to be the spirits, and the regenerated world is our world in transition, it's kind of saying that her prediction is starting to happen now. A few years later. She was also well known. She says that a lot of her writings were psychographed. She would receive these messages and she would put them down. The kind of an old painting of her would actually describe these kind of tentacles coming down on her, and these things are the way that the information, the story, the words are flowing into her while she would write them down. So this is probably one of the earliest drawings of a psychography taking place. She was also known for her healing, right? She was one of the early preachers of a holistic way of healing the body through the spiritual improvements in one's life. Yeah, she was an early Renaissance person. She wrote books, she wrote songs, she wrote poems. She was the full Monty, really. She had everything in terms of all of these community capabilities that came across with her. We now move from Germany to Italy. During a small period of time, we see a tremendous occurrence of very spiritual, very unique people. And these names are probably very familiar to everyone here. Saint Francis of Assisi, right? a blessed person. He is wealthy, comes from a wealthy family. He's still trying to find himself. He actually goes to war. He goes and fights people. So he is no different than anybody else in terms of his peers. And then one day he hears a voice from God. And God tells him to give up that life and help restructure his church. The words he's here many, many times, repeating over and over again to them, is, don't you see that my church is falling down? Go and restore it to me. So it is a recognition that things were not going well, that the people were losing that connection to Jesus, to the message that Jesus brought about, and that St. Francis should dedicate his life to make that change. Right? He very, very active in restructuring, creating the Franciscan order. He also helped the Order of St. Clare, we're going to talk about it in just a minute. And he is also the first known recorded case of stigmata. Right? He was praying in a mountain, and he had a vision. This picture here, this is that representation of that vision of what's called a seraph. This is this angel here that has 6 wings, comes in and gives him the 5 stigmatas, the 5 injuries of Jesus to him, as a representation and as a remembrance of his faith and his continuing dedication to Jesus. Incredible. Well, at the same time, St. Anthony, St. Antonio, Brazilians, St. Anthony of Padua, another very spiritual person, right? He's Portuguese, right? He's born in Portugal. He comes across St. Francis. And he also gives up his life of wealth for one of poverty. He has many accomplishments in terms of promoting the Christian faith in Portugal and then in Italy. But he also, he had several recorded experiences as a medium. One was of that bipolarity. He was praying, studying in St. Pierre de Angara in Iroquois. He is actually preaching. And then suddenly, he was also in another choir session, in another lecture, 2 different places. And people recorded that he was in the pulpit talking, but he was totally motionless. The voice was coming out of him, but nothing would move. This again quite an experience for those who were listening to his preaching. And finally, it was also recorded that he was in Padua, Italy. And a few hours later, he shows up in Lisbon. Now, this is 13th century. You don't go from Italy, hop on a plane, and get to Lisbon overnight. In fact, it would take 3 months at that time for the journey. But he shows up to help defend some of his relatives. And this is recorded in the legal records that he was there as a witness to help defend his relatives against accusations. Another blessed person, all 3 knew each other. Imagine the St. Clare of Assisi. I think many of you would know Clare's story. She founded the Order of the Poor Ladies, now called the Poor Clares. Very saintly person, also dedicated her life to religion. She lets go of all of her, obviously all her belongings. And many records of her having visions. Even obviously to join and follow this path was started with a vision. She had premonitions. many people would come to her to help them see what they should be doing and get counsel. So 3 fantastic individuals who were sharing the same moment in life, this earth, helping, as God said, bring back His church, His religion, His message to what Christ had given. And Christ had said essentially this, that we need to help those who are weakest. We should not be striving for the material wealth as our final goal in life. At the end of the Middle Ages, we have continuing, regardless in spite of this work done by these 3 saints, we still start into some dark period. This is reflected in some ways by Dante Alighieri. He is known for writing maybe one of the greatest literary poems in history, called the Divine Comedy. Very complex, very difficult to read. It is a detailed description of hell, purgatory, and paradise. It provides scientific, provides narrative, it provides detailed descriptions of the invisible world. To the point that many people believe, based on some of C's own writing, that Dante was actually allowed to go there during his sleep. As we know, as we sleep, our spirit is liberated. And often, where we go, we don't bring those memories necessarily back with us. But as a medium, he was allowed to continue and go there several times and bring back the memories of those visits. And that these are what is described in the Divina Comedy. The medieval Inquisition is in full bloom. Here is a dangerous time to be a medium. If you did not follow the doctrines, the dogmas, the orders, and the absolute obedience to the church, you are in danger of being labeled a heretic or a witch. And if you were not publicly disavow those ideas, you had one destiny, to be burned in public. So we can see that during that climate, during this culture, those who had this natural immune capabilities were either going to expose themselves and risk being killed, or they were going to suppress it, hide it, not tell anyone. Imagine if you were a parent of an 8-year Hildegard at this time that started to see visions. You would spank her until she confessed that she's not seeing anything, because you know that she goes on that path and starts telling people what she's seeing, that she's going to be being a witch. But we don't see many records of great mediums happening at this time. But I would say that's not very surprising. But there is one great exception. Joan of Arc. Young girl, uneducated, from a small village, born in a peasant's family. She receives visions that she should take the word of Christ and help the king become king. Now imagine, she was, I think when she started seeing these visions, she was around 12, 13. Imagine a 12 or 13-year-old country girl, farmer, receiving this. How is she going to do this? Well, we know the story. She did it. She is so convincing in her details, in her description of her visions and of her mission, that she actually succeeds in helping Charles VII become king. And this is a time of the 100-Year War between England and France. And because of this whole monarchy things, there were English descendants as kings in France and vice versa, so it was a bit of a mess. So Charles was actually English descendant, but he became king of France. And she led armies into war.